Joined by residents, civil society groups, faith-based organizations and business leaders. The aim of the march was to put pressure on parliamentarians to vote in favor of a motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma. Now, the opposition parties say they do not want to remove the ruling party from power, but to remove the president, and they hope a secret ballot will bring different results from the previous 7. Well, joining us in studio now is political analyst Ms. Lebohang Pheko. Lebohang, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alicia.
Lebohang, these ascensions that the opposition is saying that we just want to remove President Jacob Zuma and not the ANC in power, do they sound truthful to you?
Well, I think so. I mean, we've got precedent in several regards. Number one, remember there was the removal or the recall of President Mbeki, and in that case that was a party political process, but nonetheless the impact could have been potentially similar, because in one respect the speaker could have evoked a notion that said that this had to be taken to the ballot and that the people had to get a mandate. That did not happen, and there was relative stability as a result of that. We need to be very careful that we differentiate between the notion of the head of state, the head of party, and governance at large, the governing party at large. And if we feel that the head of party and state are intertwined and completely the same as governing, then we're going to run into problems. And of course, across the African continent, we also have different precedents for this, where, for example, parties in Nigeria, Zambia, where presidents have died in office, as they seem to do, particularly in Zambia. What has happened in those instances is that the deputy president usually steps in and deputizes, and then eventually at some stage, as determined by parliament, this will then be tested to the ballot, by the ballot, and put to the test of the people. But the idea that this is a removal automatically of the government is not quite accurate.
Let's now talk about should the motion pass. Lebohang, do you think that South Africa at large, or even the ANC, is ready for that result?
I don't think they're ready for that result. I don't know even if South Africa at large is ready for that result, despite what we see on social media. What we do know is that there's an appetite for change. We also realize that there have been rumblings on the ground for a long time, and I think the recall of former Minister Pravin Gordhan and former Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas were part of the growing groundswell of discontent. There have been many previous to that, the Nkandla Gate, the Nhlanhla Gate. There have been a whole bunch of previous incidences, the findings of the public protector, the findings of the Constitutional Court, in fact. So there's both a public process and also a legislative process, as well as a constitutional process through the Chapter 9 Institute of the Public Protector, which would indicate that morally, both morally and legally, there is a case for the removal of the president. Now, of course, there are two ways to go about this. The one would be impeachment, according to Section 89, which, of course, as we know, needs a 2/3 majority. What an impeachment is, however, is a legal test, right? It's a factual test. Is there enough evidence to show that there's been gross mismanagement, gross misgovernance, wrongdoing in the extreme case? Now, what this is, Section 102 of the Constitution, when we're talking about the removal of the president, a vote of no confidence, of course, is a motion of that exactly. It's a confidence test. But the two are closely intertwined. And as much as it's useful in terms of legal and constitutional speak to separate them, we should also bear in mind that a vote of, a moral test or a legal test can lead to a lack of morale, a loss of confidence.
I mean, Lebohang, this is exactly the issue that has been brought about the whole day. The fact that, allowing the secret ballot, won't it then open a can of worms when it comes to the issues of corruption? Because we spoke about transparency. We want our leaders to be held accountable. How are you holding them accountable if you don't know how they voted?
Yes, and I think that the other thing is that we should also be aware, exactly that. We should also be aware that constitutionally, in the case of UDM versus the Speaker, the Constitutional Court held unambiguously that MPs have an obligation first to their constituents and second to their parties.
Hence the vote in your conscience.
It is state before party. It is people before party.
All right. And of course, what do you think the ANC, a lot of people are saying it seems like there is some sort of confidence in them saying, well, let's go to it with the secret ballot, we're going to win it again. And meanwhile, you're hearing opposition parties pretty adamant of the fact that they've garnered those numbers from the opposition. So we're at a stalemate here.
Look, I mean, there are about 100 of the,
there's a fake list.
There's a speculative, exactly. Yeah. There's fake news, fake lists, real lists. We're not even sure anymore. Yeah. But if we assume that the entire opposition votes for this motion of no confidence, and we also assume that there's a sizable critical mass within the ANC, within the governing party, which might also want to, I mean, there's a few names which have already sprung up. There are many more, of course, who will have their cards close to their chest. I do know that, I do suspect that it will be a lot more decisive, closer than the previous ones. It won't be just a symbolic gesture. I don't think it will be enough to remove the president on this occasion. But the point is, if we look at the previous votes of no confidence, they have been incrementally growing in support.
Absolutely. All right, Lebohang, thank you so much for joining us. That is Ms. Lebohang Pheko, a political analyst, talking to us about some of the things that might be expected, of course, to come out of the motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma. It is set to take place at 2 o'clock. It's just gone past 23 minutes past 1 today. And these are some of the tweets that you have, of course, written to us about the goings on today. MPs are going to vote with their wallets in their mind. That is Mabo talking to us on Twitter there. Rashmika says, with all the time he's had, I'm pretty sure he's put measures in place to make sure he gets all the votes he needs to stay. Let's take a look at more tweets there if we do have. Mabo yeah, there she is again. I'm thinking that many of us will be disappointed when we see President Zuma still president later on this evening. Hashtag the Zuma vote. And of course, Jonas Chuene says, no confidence, hashtag no Zuma vote. I want to bet with someone that sometime next week, this time, Zuma will still be our president for 200 Rand. I don't know what we can do with that one. Well, let's cross